Great Depression had a profound impact on people's lives in the United States and led to changes in family traditions. The economic crisis affected not only the financial side of life, but also the very structure of society, habits, and values that Americans considered basic. Before the Great Depression, the traditional American family was often built on a patriarchal principle, where the man was the main breadwinner and the woman was the housewife. In the context of the crisis, such roles began to change. Men lost their jobs, and women, who had previously been mainly involved in household chores, were forced to go to work. At that time, women began to work en masse in factories, shops, and other low-paying positions. In some families, women became the main breadwinners. This change in the role of women in society has also led to greater participation of women in social and community movements. For example, during the Depression, women often became activists in various charities and volunteers. On the other hand, men who lost their jobs often faced depression and despair, as they could not provide for their family in their usual way. This changed the perception of men as the breadwinner, and gradually led to new forms of partnership in the family. During the Great Depression, the family was forced to completely rethink their spending habits. Every expense, even the most insignificant, was subject to strict control. This affected not only the daily expenses, but also the traditions of holidays and family events. Most families began to strictly save on food. Cheap products such as potatoes, beans, and rice were often used. At that time, recipes that did not require expensive ingredients became popular. For example, Depression cake, a cake made without eggs and milk, or simple potato and cabbage soups that allowed the whole family to feed with minimal money. Christmas, which used to be a time of luxury and expensive gifts, has become much more modest. Instead of expensive toys and jewelry, families began exchanging homemade gifts, and gift bags were often made from newspapers or recycled packaging. In some families, even Christmas dinners have become not just a holiday, but a symbol of survival. Special dishes were often prepared from leftovers, which was caused not so much by the desire to save money as by the need to make enough out of small things. The Great Depression changed not only the way of life within the family, but also how people began to look at money, work, and relationships in society. It was important not only to survive, but also to support others. The development of charitable organizations and community canteens has become an important part of American life. People who lost their jobs often turned to churches, charities, and volunteer groups for help. There were soup kitchens, where poor people could get food for free. These organizations became not only vital help for people, but also an important part of the social structure of that time. We can also note the increased role of volunteerism and mutual assistance. Local communities have become more cohesive. People who lost their jobs started exchanging goods and services. It was a time when it was important not only to think about yourself, but also to support others. In the context of the economic crisis, everything that was previously perceived as commonplace or even superfluous has become appreciated. The way we look at simple things like food, clothes, or homes has changed. Many families started gardening. During the economic crisis, growing your own crops has become not only a necessity, but also part of a cultural tradition. People grew vegetables on household plots and also raised chickens for eggs and meat. Household crafts such as sewing, knitting, and recycling old clothes have become a daily practice. Instead of buying new clothes, people often redid old ones or reused fabric to save money. At this time, there was also a renewed interest in stationery and mechanical goods that could be reused. For example, families often had old clothes changed, furniture redone, and household appliances repaired. The crisis had not only economic and social consequences, but also psychological ones. Faced with poverty and the loss of their usual lifestyle, many people began to seek solace in their family, in traditions that gave them a sense of stability. After the difficult years of depression, people sought to preserve the spirit of unity in the family, found solace in joint activities such as evening readings, games, or even just conversations. For example, family gatherings have become an important tradition where each family member could express their feelings and offer solutions on how to get through difficult times. In the late 1930s, when the economy began to recover gradually, the impact of the Great Depression was still noticeable. Many habits and traditions developed during the years of crisis have been preserved in people's lives. They have become the basis for many new social norms, such as a more responsible attitude towards money, the rejection of waste, and the desire for family unity. Radio has become an important source of information and entertainment for many families. At this time, when cinema, theaters, and other forms of leisure became inaccessible to most, radio became not just a way to follow the news, but also a way to unite the family. It became a kind of family tradition. Everyone gathered in the evening to listen to their favorite radio shows, which strengthened the bonds between family members. When the head of the family lost his job and income was reduced to zero, it forced all family members to show flexibility and survival. The Hale family is from California. Jack, the head of the family, worked on the railroad and lost his job in 1932. His wife, Helen, had previously been a housewife, but now she had to work in a textile factory. Helen often returned home with sore hands from threads and fabric, but this was her opportunity to provide for her family, while Jack could not find a stable job. These examples could be seen in every American family. Men accustomed to the role of breadwinners faced despair. Women, despite their hard work, have learned how to manage a budget and organize their lives. A kind of revolution began in the houses. Instead of old habits and rigid hierarchies of family roles, new forms of partnership have emerged. In New York, the Johnson family, where James was an accountant, began looking for work in various fields. His wife, Marjorie, mastered a job at a barber shop in a few weeks, and then began doing her hair at home. This helped the family to survive and maintain at least a minimum standard of living. At such moments, every change, every innovation became a source of strength. Money, as such, became the main dimension of reality during the Great Depression. Every dollar was worth its weight in gold, and every purchase was a matter of survival. Few could afford the luxury or even the satisfaction of basic needs. For example, if previously the family budget included expenses for recreation, entertainment, or the purchase of a new car, now the money went only for the most necessary things: food, housing, and clothes. Watches, jewelry, and even birthday gifts seemed like unnecessary luxuries. The Bennett family from Chicago was among those who felt the crisis immediately. They used to live comfortably enough, but after the stock market crash, the Bennetts had to change their lifestyle. Mr. Bennett lost his job in banking, and his wife Laura started saving for everything. The example is simple. Instead of buying new curtains, she redid the old ones, adding some lace and paint to update the interior. Instead of going to a cafe or restaurant, the family began to arrange dinners at home using the simplest products: potatoes, beans, rice. the so-called milk paintings became popular. Dishes made from milk, which was considered one of the most affordable products. Interesting fact: in the 1930s, paper money appeared for the first time, which could be exchanged for food in some stores. This measure was introduced as part of a program to help the poor, and it played an important role in the fight against hunger among the population. Strangely enough, it was during the Great Depression that cooking became not just an art, but a real survival strategy. It was a time when simple meals became hits, and saving on food became a necessity. Food began to be perceived as a symbol of survival. People have learned to cook with leftover food, to make new dishes from them, in which the main thing is not only the taste, but also the opportunity to feed the family. There are many recipes that have become famous during these years. One of them is potato soup, a simple and cheap dish made from potatoes, water, and rare spices. This soup was not only satisfying, but also extremely cheap, which made it possible to feed a large family, spending minimal money. But the wacky cake, which was prepared without eggs and milk, replacing them with vinegar and soda, became a real culinary miracle of those years. It was so popular that it was even prepared for festive dinners. However, the most popular dishes were made from canned foods, which could be stored for months, which meant they ensured food stability. Dishes such as tuna casserole, which were prepared everywhere from poor neighborhoods to bohemian cafes, became a traditional treat. Quote, "We learned how to cook what we had and do it with love. There was nothing more expensive than a good homemade meal." Memoirs of Grace Lee, a resident of Pennsylvania. The Great Depression not only changed the economy, but also forced people to reconsider their views on public relations. The terrible economic downturn did not just affect financial flows, it changed the very perception of life and relationships within and between families, neighbors, and society as a whole. One of the most striking examples was the massive movement to save water and electricity, which was led by the local community. When electricity became a luxury, people formed associations to share information on how to conserve and use resources wisely. Neighborhood groups shared food and basic necessities. In addition, at that time, the number of volunteers and charities that helped poor families increased dramatically. For example, the Salvation Army has become an important player in the social assistance system, offering free housing, food, and clothing. In the 1930s, public food kitchens appeared. Local soup kitchens, where poor people could get a hot lunch for free. It was not just a phenomenon of charity, but also an important social trend that supported people's morale in difficult times. When the economic crisis gradually subsided in the late 1930s, many of the traditions developed during the Depression era continued to live on, although the external reality began to change. Families who have gone through these difficult times have maintained the habit of taking care of each other, sharing small things, and appreciating every moment. The Daniels family from Texas never stopped saving for small things after the end of the Great Depression, despite the economic recovery. Every Christmas at their house began with a discussion of how they would celebrate so as not to waste too much. And although they could afford more in the following years, their main tradition remained economy and moderation. An important lesson for many was that the family is not only a source of finance, but also a support in difficult moments. They have learned to value mutual support and care rather than material benefits. During the Depression, we realized that the real value is in people, not in things. Memoirs of James Tyler, a resident of Texas. The Great Depression was a time of not only economic crisis, but also cultural transformation. Music, art, cinema, all these forms of expression have undergone changes, and many artists have found inspiration in difficult times to create works that have left a mark on history. Greta Garbo, one of the most famous actresses of the time, played in films during the Depression years that reflected the spirit of that time. For example, the film A Night in Paris, 1932, where the characters face poverty and social injustice, became a reflection of the experiences of that time. However, music, especially jazz, has gained even more popularity. It was during these years that Billie Holiday, Duke Ellington, and Louis Armstrong took jazz to new heights, filling people's hearts with optimism and harmony. Billie Holiday, who experienced her own difficulties during the Depression, wrote the iconic song "Strange Fruit," which became a kind of symbol of the struggle for the rights of blacks in America. The song, which describes the terrible consequences of racism, has long been a marker of change in society. The Great Depression was also a catalyst for migration, especially in rural areas. Residents of the central and southern states, where agriculture suffered due to dust storms, moved west en masse in search of work and a better life. One of the most iconic episodes of this migration was the dust storm that swept through states such as Oklahoma, Texas, and Kansas. Millions of farmers were forced to leave their homes to survive and went west to California. These migrants often faced harsh living conditions, as well as fierce competition for work. In California, they called themselves Oklahomans, or Dust Bowls, and often ended up in refugee camps that offered modest living conditions. John Steinbeck's family, inspired by the life of migrants, is described in his famous novel, The Grapes of Wrath, 1939. This novel became a masterpiece that revealed many aspects of that time: poverty, the struggle for survival, and social injustice. In response to the crisis, President Franklin D. Roosevelt proposed the New Deal program, which not only saved the economy, but also changed the very structure of Americans' lives. Programs such as the WPA, Workers' Project Alliance, and the Social Security Act have dramatically changed social structures. The WPA has created millions of jobs for the unemployed, many of whom have taken jobs building roads, bridges, and schools, as well as landscaping projects. In the 1930s, the famous Golden Bridge in San Francisco was built, as well as other iconic structures. In New England, a whole network of public buildings and libraries was built, for example, in Massachusetts, where, due to lack of funds, the population actively used public libraries as the only source of information and education. The Social Security Act was the first step towards creating a social security system in the United States, providing a minimum income for the elderly, the disabled, and widows. Roosevelt's New Deal led to the fact that people began to perceive the state not only as a regulator, but also as a source of support and protection. This has changed the perception of welfare and social care in the United States. When the whole country was going through an economic crisis, Hollywood became a place where you could forget about your problems for at least a few hours. Cinema has become an important means of psychological escape from reality. During the Depression years, viewers went to the cinema to escape from reality and relive stories about rich and successful people, exciting adventures, and romance. Hollywood was a source of escapism, where you could forget about your own difficulties. One of the most striking examples of such escapism was a series of films starring Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, Top Hat, 1935. These films, filled with dances and songs, gave the audience a feeling of luxury and happiness, which contrasted with the reality of depression. Another important example was the films Oscar and La La Land, which became symbols of the time, depicting the lives of the rich and famous as something completely unattainable, which allowed viewers to forget about their poverty, at least for a moment. The youth during the Great Depression became a kind of lost generation. Many young people could not find work, and many of them found themselves without education, which created huge difficulties in the future. About 40% of the youth of that time were unemployed, and many could not afford to get an education. The young people, who were called hoppy, from hobo, tramp, traveled the country in search of work, often on freight trains, encountering many difficulties and hardships along the way. In his famous work, The Grapes of Wrath, John Steinbeck described a young man who, going to the West in search of work, is faced with harsh living conditions and the impotence of the system. For young people, depression became a time of searching for their identity and dreams of a better life, which eventually led to great social changes and an increase in protest sentiments in the 1930s and 1940s.